All right. Hello, hello, and welcome in. We are talking about BIP-110 again. And before I get started, I just want to say thank you so much to the people who left comments. I appreciate all of them. I responded to everyone. Some really good insights, some things I didn't even know before, or just things I didn't consider because I was coming from a strict don't change consensus purist mindset. And yes, thank you for throwing a bunch of stuff in there that helped me look at other things. I have since changed my position on BIP-110, so stick around. I'm going to let you know all of my thoughts at the end. But I just wanted to drop this video. This channel is a Bitcoin education channel. And if there's anybody trying to navigate this crazy world, I mean, if you go into X right now, you it's just infighting. It's nothing but character attacks, gotcha screenshots. It's gross. I don't like it. That's my least favorite thing about it. And yeah, so I just wanted to break this down, put out some more information, some good information there for anybody who's seeking to, find a middle ground in where this debate is going right now, because it is quite contentious out there. A lot of interesting information out there. But anyways, let's get into it. So 2 weeks ago, I dropped a video on BIP-110, and the stance I took was against it. The reason why I did was because of consensus. It's requiring only half of what normal BIPs require to be passed, and it's a precedent thing. I was coming from a precedent purist form where if you don't have something that has widespread approval, then it's kind of set in a bad precedent. Anyway, so like I'd said, since then I've done lots of digging. I didn't drop any videos last week when I usually drop videos daily, and because I really wanted to just, doom scroll X and see what's really going on. A lot of it is really ugly, not pretty at all. But yeah, I'm going to get into it. Let me know what you think. Please let those comments roll. And I am, like I said, going to respond to every single one of them, good, bad, ugly. I don't care. I think more discourse is needed, not just character assassinations, low IQ pokes, all those kinds of things. Without any further ado, let's get into it. To understand any of this is to go back and see what BIP-110 is claiming to correct. Back in 2014, Core, which was 0.9.0, they shipped the op return policy, which was a way to add a small amount of data to a transaction without bloating the actual coin ledger. The default limit was 40 bytes. This was enough for a hash and an identifier, nothing more. That number was arbitrary. It was deliberately just big enough for a legitimate tagging and nothing else. Core later raised that default to 80 bytes on its own with no consensus or anything like that. That is a policy change which core developers do. Then in 2023, I remember this vividly, the Bitcoin wizards, the ordinals and inscriptions emerged, and people found a way around the op return limit, stuffing data into witness fields and script paths instead, which is a different part of the transaction, never meant to carry this kind of payload, which leads to the bloating. Suddenly, images, text, and entire files were loaded into Bitcoin blocks themselves. Loophole. Extending the data limit to cover witness and script data too. Then in October of 2023, Gloria Zhao rejected that and formalized her reasoning by January of 2024, and her stance was developers shouldn't decide what counts as legitimate payment versus legitimate data, which is her taking a stance in anyway, which I thought was kind of funny. The rejection became a de facto policy. Then it swung the other way in 2025. Peter Todd introduced a change at the request of an active core developer that didn't just leave the loophole open, it removed the cap almost entirely. The new limit went all the way up to 100,000 bytes. It merged in June in 2025 and shipped in Bitcoin Core version 30 that October. Fallout was immediate. I think we all remember this. Gloria Zhao deleted her Twitter account and sustained personal attacks, and well, she flung out personal attacks too. And many people called this change a malicious code that could kill Bitcoin. Separately, a lot of people also came out expressing their concerns over this change. One specifically was Nick Szabo, and he pointed out the issue with nodes holding data that people could be responsible for because you download the data onto your node. And if there are images, images that shouldn't be on people's computers, you could be liable for that. That's the fire that BIP-110 exists to put out. And I agree with it. I agree with the fact that you shouldn't be liable for anything that somebody else puts on the blockchain that you then download onto your node. That is a real concern, and I agree with it. I don't think any inscriptions, NFTs, anything else like that should be on the blockchain. And now here's the part that I had actually, and admittedly, did not really know much about. Bitcoin has two different layers of rules. The consensus rules are the actual protocol. They define what makes a block valid. period, across the entire node network. Break a consensus rule, and every properly running node rejects your block, full stop. Changing the consensus means changing Bitcoin itself, which is why it needs heavy machinery, miner signaling, activation thresholds, a real risk of a chain split if the network doesn't agree. And as I mentioned in my last video, a few examples are SegWit and Taproot. They both had over 95% miner signaling before they were activated. The other is policy rules, and these are different. These are just settings, what a node chooses to relay, what a miner chooses to include in a block template. Policy doesn't touch validity. A transaction that breaks someone's policy settings can still be perfectly valid and get mined by anyone whose settings allow it. The op return limit was a settings change, never consensus change, 40 to 80 bytes, and they made this change quietly with not many people knowing. Gloria rejecting Luke's patch, which is a quiet maintainer decision, Peter Todd's uncapped change to 100,000 bytes. All these things were quiet changes that didn't require any consensus approval. None of these ever touched the actual protocol. None of them ever needed the network's permission. Just a normal code review and a maintainer's merge, the same process used for any other software change. And here was my thought. Why can't people just change their settings to reject the data and be done with it? And some already do. That's why Bitcoin Knots exists, with stricter defaults than Core for exactly this reason. But the settings alone control what you on your node relays or miners. They do nothing to stop someone from skipping the network entirely and submitting a transaction straight to a miner who doesn't share your settings. And I hope that makes sense. Tools like Libre Relay, which I'd never heard of before, exist specifically for this. If that miner wants the fee revenue, your restrictive settings never see the transaction. It just shows up as already mined. This entire problem with inscription data existing on blocks happened because of changes made to a policy. The crappy part is that same easy layer can't actually fix it either, because the settings alone don't stop a motivated bad actor. The proposed fix has to go through the hard layer, requiring the entire network to agree or risk splitting again, like Bitcoin Cash. Correcting a low friction change is requiring a massively higher friction tool, because of the low friction tool was never capable of fully closing the door in the first place. I hope that makes sense as well. So here's what BIP-110 actually proposes and its unusual process. BIP-110, formerly the Reduced Data Temporary Soft Fork, does what its name says. For 1 year, it caps the op return back down to 83 bytes, restricts certain data pushes above 256 bytes, and limits specific scripts formats, and then automatically expires unless something else extends it. Here's where it gets contentious. A consensus change like this normally needs 95% miner signaling before activation. This is a bar which both the SegWit BIP and the Taproot BIP both cleared. BIP-110 requires 55% activation, and this is where my original issue with it came from. The proposal's own author says it's because the fork is temporary and urgent, and this is where the precedent thing comes in for me. If you're saying we're going to lower the consensus threshold to 55% from the regular 95% because this change is only temporary, that's an issue for me, because somebody else can come along and say the same thing. Here, implement this change. It's fine. It needs only 55%. It's not a big deal, blah, blah, blah. My issue is I don't want that to become a thing and a thing and a thing. BIP-110 also follows a user-activated soft fork mechanism, same model behind SegWit's 2017 activation. If 55% of miners signal support within one difficulty period, 2016 blocks, it locks in early. If that doesn't happen, there's a mandatory signaling deadline around early August 2026, and I believe it's the 7th, after which nodes running BIP-110 software start rejecting any block that doesn't signal, regardless of what the rest of the network's miners actually want. As of now, signaling is quite low, and I'm not going to mention any numbers because I actually couldn't find anything solid. There is Ocean Mining, who have completed nearly all the signaling blocks so far. No major mining pool, Foundry, Ampool, F2 pool, Binance Pool has committed signaling to BIP-110. Now, the case against BIP-110. The strongest critiques here aren't really about wanting spam on Bitcoin. People opposing BIP-110 aren't saying that we should allow spam on Bitcoin. They're about mechanism and precedent, which I mentioned in my other video. The 55% threshold is a big one. Adam Back has called this proposal a mob attack on Bitcoin's reputation. I don't know if I agree with Adam Back's statement there now that I've looked at what happened with the op return implementation to begin with, but I still struggle with getting over the precedent part there. Jameson Lopes also weighed in. He argues that these activation parameters, which are lower than the other ones, meaningfully raise the risk of an actual chain split. Saylor chimed in and called it Bitcoin's biggest self-inflicted risk. There's also a bypass problem. Peter Todd literally embedded the entire BIP-110 proposal text inside a transaction that technically complies with its own rules to prove that the restrictions can be routed around by anyone determinate enough. If the rules don't actually stop the behavior it targets, all it's really doing is adding friction and risk without solving the underlying problem. And this is the one I keep coming back to, is the precedent. Yes, I now, after doing this research, I believe that BIP-110 is fixing a real issue with Bitcoin. I do believe that. But I don't like that, one, it's temporary, and two, is that it's requiring a lower threshold on the consensus. And the thing that I keep seeing online is nobody's arguing this point that I'm about to make. If we only require 55% consensus to force a rule change once, what is stopping a very different rule change at 55% consensus down the line, which none of us would agree with? People keep saying, oh, this side is a small group of people pushing BIP through, and this side is a small group of people opposing BIP. They're kind of making the same argument on both sides for this precedent thing. And yeah, I can't let that one go. Now, the case for BIP-110, and like I said, I believe it's a very strong case. The other side, there is a real argument here, and it's worth taking very seriously. Data on the chain went from a rounding error to a real burden. By some estimates, non-financial data made up 1/3 of some blocks, and that's a lot. That's a real cost. Larger UTXO sets, bigger node storage requirements, higher fees for people just trying to send money the normal way you're supposed to on Bitcoin. Supporters argue that the 95% bar effectively hands veto power to a small entrenched minority who benefit financially from the status quo. And that's the point I was trying to make earlier, is like one side is saying, oh, a small group is controlling Bitcoin, and the other side is saying the same thing. I don't know where I fall on that. Also, mining pools earning fee revenue off large data transactions have zero incentive to ever signal support for something that cuts into that revenue. And yeah, like I hate that part that miners, yeah, they are making money off these blocks with a bunch of inscription data in them because they're costing more. I also think that's why we're not seeing a lot of miner support for this, is right now miners are struggling. So they're making some extra money with these transactions with these bloated blocks, which is not a good thing. A permanent change threshold, they'd argue, guarantees permanent inaction. A lower temporary threshold is framed as the only realistic way to force a real decision instead of an indefinite stalemate. They'd also point out that just run Bitcoin knots if you disagree. Knots adoption sits around 20 to 22% of the nodes, real growth, but nowhere near enough to meaningfully filter across the whole network. I'm hoping this all kind of makes sense. Like, it's been a lot for me to take in, the comments, responding to people. I'm going to give my opinion and the change in where I was standing from before. So if you didn't know, previously I was against BIP-110, even though I do believe Bitcoin is a money. I believe that nothing else but monetary transactions should be in these blocks. I'm still against it because I just cannot get over the precedent thing. I can't. I apologize. The process critique is real. A low threshold and a non-neutral neutrality that let the original problem ship without any vote at all, that's a legitimate structural concern no matter which side of the data debate you're on. Whether or not you want ordinals on Bitcoin, you should be uncomfortable with how casually the door got open in the first place. But the other side has a real point too. Policy alone can't fully solve this because a determined, well-funded actor can always route around relay settings. If you actually want a guarantee, not just a discouragement, changing Bitcoin settings or policy was never going to get you there. These two truths pull in completely different directions, and I think reasonable people land differently depending on how much weight they put on precedent risk versus practical effectiveness. If precedent worries you more, you land against BIP-110. If practical effectiveness worries you more, then you are for BIP-110, or at least for something like it. Honestly, I hate seeing Bitcoin infighting. Wherever you go, X, YouTube, whatever, people are just fighting. It's just a lot of character insults, IQ insults, a lot of things are just being thrown around. And I don't think it's effective for any sort of discourse or to win people over. I hate these screen capture of people's old tweets as kind of gotchas. It's as if people are never allowed to change their opinions or have an opinion from last year. It seems so counterintuitive to what Bitcoin is. People change their minds, and rightfully so, they're allowed to. And I encourage a lot of people to. It gets us nowhere where there's no discourse and all you're doing is insulting IQs. I will admit, my first video was early. I was just coming from a precedent and consensus purist mentality, and I didn't fully look into the past. Like, it just didn't seem like a big enough issue to change consensus, right? Or set a completely new precedent for Bitcoin. That was my issue. Now that I've gotten all that out and I've kind of gotten over everything of all these amazing comments that people are leaving, I now sit in the middle. I am no longer for or against. I'm in this weird middle ground where I agree with both sides. I think what I would encourage is just more discourse. If you see some of these comments somewhere, leave something valuable for them. Like, the comments that I received on my last video really opened up my eyes, encouraged me to dig deeper, look at what happened in the op return thing, just discover the difference between what a policy settings change to Bitcoin is versus a consensus change. Also, if you have an opinion and you run a node, it's your choice. You decide what goes on your node and what kind of software to run. That is your choice as a node operator. As for me, I will run knots. And I just think that's like a nice middle ground because I personally believe, and I've said this many times, that no inscription data, NFTs, ordinals should belong on Bitcoin, but Bitcoin should remain money. But I also don't think we should be changing consensus. So I think knots is a good middle ground there. What I hope more than anything is that we avoid a chain split. My whole thing for this channel and what I've always done at the end of every single video is just encourage individuals to buy Bitcoin and send it to their cold storage. One thing that I was hoping people would think about, and I hope that people going into the future think about, is new people that are entering this market. Say if you're a new Bitcoiner, you just were orange pilled, let me go check out what Bitcoin Twitter is doing, and you see all this stuff going on. I think it could deter a lot of people. I think it can be very toxic at times. And yes, I agree that sometimes the toxic maximalists are needed. They are needed, but sometimes I feel like they go overboard. At the end of the day, we all hold Bitcoin for the same reason: separating money from state. Remember that. We're not separating state from NFTs or ordinals. It's money from state. And that's the message that I wanted to send. If you're a Bitcoiner and you've been in it for years, we should be welcoming these new individuals into this space. Instead of us sitting there mocking people like Adam Back, who's literally cited in the white paper. Imagine you're a new Bitcoiner. You go ahead and read the Bitcoin white paper. Oh, who's this Adam Back guy? And you go to Twitter and you see all these tweets. I think it would just be so damaging for new people coming into the space. We need more individuals to hold Bitcoin in cold storage. That is what is true adoption. Yes, I get the ETFs and all those places. They're doing all these amazing things with their treasury companies, but that's not important for individuals. For individuals like you and me who hold our Bitcoin in cold storage, we should be welcoming to other people. And I just don't think that attacking people like Adam Back and Michael Saylor is a very good idea or a very good representation of what Bitcoin is. I don't want to undermine the importance of what BIP-110 is trying to do. They are correcting an issue that I am very surprised is allowed to be done in Bitcoin, like the changing in policies with no real widespread consensus support, which has happened so much to the point that now we need a consensus change to be able to fix that. But because of that, we now have these precedent talks and these consensus issues that are going around, and people are just saying you have a low IQ and all these other spam lovers and all that stuff. I'm not sure that just pointing fingers at other people and calling names is really going to help the situation. Anyways, the last thing I want to say is I think a lot of what's going around right now, a lot of the contentiousness, a lot of the infighting is because we're in the bear market. I think because Bitcoin's price is so low and in the gutter, a lot of people are emotionally charged. Just remember, try to remove the numerical number on your cold wallet that you see representing your stack from your emotions. As long as that stack number keeps going up and it's in cold storage, you're good to go. You're in good standing. Just remember, try to be encouraging, supportive, and welcoming to anybody who doesn't seem to know what they're talking about when it comes to BIP-110. And honestly, I'm hoping that a lot of people who are new to Bitcoin are like me when I first started, where I just ignored any sort of technical debate and just kind of focused on learning what Bitcoin was, how to send it to cold storage, and how to secure my OPSEC. And only since like in the last year have I really started to dive into a lot of the technical stuff. I'm hoping that if you are new into Bitcoin and you are watching this video, that you know that yes, there's a lot of issues that happen in Bitcoin, and a lot of these things can get very heated and very contentious. But at the end of the day, Bitcoin is still going to win. Our goal: separate money from state, send that Bitcoin to cold storage. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know what you think in the comments below. I hope this video hit. I was just trying to piece it together kind of quickly. And as always, if you can buy Bitcoin, send it to cold storage. Peace out.